Hello! Today I'm going to do something a little bit different and give you guys some quick recommendations based off of Dungeons & Dragons classes. So as you can probably notice by this game tray behind me and all of these dice that constantly live on my bookshelf, I'm really into playing role-playing games, and Dungeons & Dragons is just a huge part of the things that I love about nerd culture, and so I wanted to do something a little fun and different and bring that into these videos. So I'm going to be going through some of the most well-known Dungeons & Dragons classes and giving a book recommendation based on, what those classes remind me of and what I think the people who are playing those classes also remind me of. So let's dive right into it. Starting with the Barbarian. It's a wonderful class that is all about getting really angry and going to fuck shit up. And so I thought a book that had a lot of fast-paced action, high stakes, and protagonists that just don't stop really was something that I wanted to push as a barbarian. So I picked the book that I really just finished, which might be a surprising pick, but it's All the Stars and Teeth by Adeline Grace. The reason I picked this book is because, like I said, it's extremely fast-paced, and the action sequences in it are big, larger than life, and just go really, really, really hard. There is an aspect of brutality and ferocity that's buried into the magic system here. That kind of craving for just anger and not knowing where to stop is a big part of the opening stakes of this book, and so I thought that was a really good connection. Small synopsis: this is about a princess of a group of islands who has the power to essentially detect and read people's souls, but also to end people's life by kind of devouring or destroying their soul. And early on in the book she gets into trouble because she doesn't know when to stop, and her powers are kind of turned into this warped dark thing, and so she has to flee and go on a journey across the other islands in her kingdom to kind of regain mastery over her powers and learn a bigger truth about her kingdom. It's a really wonderful book. I just read it really quickly on Friday and had a really great time with it. And yeah, it's the fast-paced, kind of dark, twisted sort of magic system that I thought would go really well with the idea of my good friends that are barbarians. For the Bard, I picked Amberlow by Elena Donnelly. This is a book that is set in a quasi-1920s feeling alternative universe. It's full of cabarets and tough crime bosses and detectives and all sorts of these it feels like an undercover spy novel, but also in the Roaring '20s and in this weird, interesting alternative universe system where the countries are really interesting in terms of their political alliances, and there's sort of a lot of government issues happening, but also underground mafia-esque issues happening. I read this book a while ago, but I picked it for the idea of a bard because it has a lot of these fun and flashy and sexy elements that I think are typical of our bards. These are the folks that, are running into a situation and looking to see how they can seduce their way out of any problem. And that's definitely how I feel the characters in this book are in some cases. They're just they're fun, they're witty, they're sexy, they're, yeah, the whole world is just very immersive and visual and a little bit sensual. Yeah, I thought this fit really well. Next up, we have our clerics. Almost every time I play D&D, try to make a cleric, because I think there's so many fun ways to play clerics. They can be so reconstructive, but also so destructive and cause so much havoc. And that is why I picked an unconventional choice for the idea of our lovely healers, which is one of my favorite books of all time, which is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. Erica, why did you pick one of the most destructive books as the healing class? Because I feel clerics at their core are all about devotion to a higher power and finding their way to control these actually OP powers in a way that is either responsible or totally destructive, because you can play bad clerics. That's something that's not talked about a lot, because clerics are usually the healing class, but you can play evil clerics, folks who just totally have all this negative energy and negative power that they just use and wield destruction on the earth. And that is very similar to the kind of ethical dilemma and power stuff that Rin, our main character, goes through in this book. This is a war story told in an alternate universe kind of set around China during the sort of opioid wars and war with Imperial Japan. And it follows our main character, Rin, who is a like low-class girl who was born into like the kind of southern provincial territory, and she works really hard to get into the elite military institution and goes to that elite military institution and like has to learn to master a lot of like war skills, but then also unlock this sort of power that's within her that connects her to a pantheon of gods, including one god in particular that is very destructive and is connected to Rin for the long haul. So again, I picked this for Cleric because it's a lot of it has a lot of points where it really gets into the decision making of like controlling life and death, and like how much destructive power you can wield and how much of yourself you give up when you kind of form a relationship with a god. You could say that this would be a Warlock book, but I actually really enjoyed it as a Cleric book because there's just more color and like excitement than the book I picked for Warlock. So we'll get to that. Next up is Druid. For Druid, I picked the Witchland series. So book one is Truth Witch by Susan Dennard. I struggled a bit with deciding where to put this book because I knew it had a vibe that just fit like a couple of different Dungeons and Dragons classes, but I eventually went with Druid because I feel like it's one of the most well done sort of elemental systems that I have on this list, and Druid magic is very much rooted in nature and connections and sort of this kind of divine magic connected to living things, and that's very much what the magic system in this book is. Not all of it is connected. It's not like air, wind, fire, and earth, the way that some like elemental magic systems are, but there are pieces of that. But then people can have other abilities, like the main character is a truth witch, which means that she can kind of detect and play with the truth a little bit. Like that is her element. Explored connections and connective magic in a way that felt very much kind of, to me, like what the essence of a druid is. This book follows two young girls, Safia and Iseult, who are bound really close together and are just like the closest of friends, and they get separated in a bunch of magical, or like in some hijinks, and have to go their own separate paths, always trying to come back to each other while like everything gets in their way pretty much. Yeah, it's a really fascinating book. The characters in it are great. The magic system felt so like earthy and connected that it just reminded me so much of like what it feels like to play a druid, who have all of these abilities across the spectrum of elements that are all very like linked to nature and linked to changing the environment and like moving the environment in a way that you want it to. That's very much what the magic system of this book felt like. Alright, my book choice for fighter is very simple. It's Patrick Rothfuss's The Name of the Wind, the first in the Kingkiller Chronicles. I have very little to say about this other than fighters are that class where you want to do a lot of things, but you're not really sure which one is really calling to you. You know you want to do just a lot, but not in any particular direction, so you pick a fighter because fighters have really nice features in terms of just like beating stuff up, but then they also have a lot of interesting abilities and feats that you can take to kind of perfect and guide your fighter. Similarly, I feel like The Name of the Wind has a lot of things in it. The main character of this book is telling his own story, and it's a super epic story that spans over his entire life, and we get to see that entire story, or you know, this is only the first book, so the first part of that story play out over the course of the book. It's just a book about heroes and like telling your own story as a hero and what it means to become a hero, and that felt very fighterish to me. It's really not that deep. You can just do a lot of things very well. That is The Name of the Wind, and also what it feels like to play a fighter. Next we have The Monk. For the Monk class, I picked Descendant of the Crane by Joan Hay. This book, the whole point of a monk is to be well trained in both body and mind, right? So you're always kind of honing your skills and honing your like mental balance and your core of like your person, and I feel like that's the work that was being done in The Descendant of the Crane. It's an East Asian inspired fantasy world, and the main character is the princess or like emperor's daughter who sets out to investigate what she believes was the murder of her father, the emperor. And she gets drawn into all of this court politics about where there's corruption and there's persecution of an oppressed group and there's hostility from a neighboring kingdom to deal with, and our main character is dealing with all of these things while teaming up with a con man criminal type person who is very mysterious and kind of we need to figure out, and he's very just it reminds me a lot of L from Death Note, if you've ever watched Death Note or read the manga. But anyways, those are the main characters in this book, and kind of the story itself is all this court drama, and we're watching our protagonist kind of grow up in terms of her ability to find the truth, so a very material challenge, which is similar to a monk's physical challenge, but then we're also seeing her have to duke out the details of her relationships with other people, which to me felt more like mentally stabilizing yourself and building yourself up. So it reminded me very much of the monk's training type thing, and that is why I recommend it for those of you who are playing monks. When I think of paladins, I think of a lot of big epic ordeals and bringing the divine light of your god and championing the message of your god and your people or whatever. So in Pathfinder 2nd edition, the paladin class is actually called champion, and I think that fits really well. So the book I picked for this, which fits with that kind of theme, that kind of epic scale, is There Will Come a Darkness by Katie Rose Poole. This book follows a group of characters in an ancient world-inspired fantasy setting. Each of the main characters we follow are figures in an important prophecy, but they don't know it themselves yet. And the course of the book is about finding out where they fit in this prophecy and figuring out if the prophecy it means that they are going to bring the entire world into darkness, or if there's some way to avert that sort of promise coming about. One of the main characters has to essentially go on a quest to reclaim his homeland. One of the characters is an assassin, and another of the characters is the assassin's sister, who is kind of the driving force for everything our assassin does. One of the characters is just some random street rat, and one of them is an actual paladin figure. So it's a very fascinating book with a diverse cast of characters and this sort of epic, final feeling plotline that I felt was very interesting and kind of straightforward in a way that paladins are on the surface, but with a depth and a depth to it and a complexity that I feel what it feels like to actually play a paladin, because you have a lot of choices as to what you're going to do next. For Ranger, I picked out The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. This is a book set in Russia, and it's a folktale inspired fantasy. So the main character, Vasya, is a young girl. We see her grow up over the course of the story, and she has the ability to connect with creatures of Russian folklore, kind of making herself ostracized by the rest of her people. But when this Christian priest and her very religious stepmom kind of start to threaten the town because of their sort of fear over the folklore that Vasya is speaking to, she has to kind of unite with them and bring them to help her village and her family before it is taken over by an evil winter spirit. I picked this for Ranger because it does feel very connected with the earth and very sort of do-it-yourself survivalist in a way that I wanted to pick Ranger over Druid for this book because this book felt very severe and with high stakes just to survive. It's a very harsh world that they're living in, because I don't know if they're actually in Siberia or if they're just close, but they're very much in the wilderness. And so there's a lot of the book goes into what it takes to survive during the winter here, and what it means if crops are a few days late or travelers are delayed. That felt a lot like what it feels like to play a ranger, where you're working on all these survival skills and that sort of thing. For Rogue, there were so many books I thought about picking out, and there's so many books I wanted to switch around. I finally went with The Gilded Wolves by Roshani Chokshi. This is a heist novel that takes place in France. It follows a group of various misfits as they end up going to claim some hidden artifacts that are the birthright of one of the main characters, who was kind of stripped from power as a young child, and has a claim to the sort of magical underbelly of society in this world. All the main characters come from extremely diverse backgrounds and are just like very cleverly written and are like come together and have formed relationships in such deep ways. And this reminded me so much of the rogue as a character type. It's a slippery, assassin-y class with focuses on like stealing and bribing and like the dark way of doing things, which is kind of what is happening here. Like these are the underdogs in society who are like taking back what they feel is rightfully theirs and who are working for kind of their own gain and their own incentives that we don't really get to see until like midway and towards the end of the book. But then also like rogues typically have like shit personalities with like a little heart of gold or like a secret reason for doing what they're doing. I feel like when we play them in D&D, and that is very much what this book is. It's a bunch of misfits coming together and kind of rising up beyond their situation to reach their goals, and that's very roguish to me. Okay, for Sorcerer, I picked the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. I, again, wanted to put this in so many different classes. I wanted to put it in Druid, and then I wanted to put it in Wizard, and then I wanted to put it somewhere else. Anyways, I finally settled on Sorcerer for this because the 5th season has a lot to do with innate magic and people who are differentiated based on the abilities that they have naturally. Basically, in this world, there are people who can have an effect on the earth around them. I can't remember the exact terms that are used here, but essentially it's like a very dangerous magic that a lot of people fear, and so when you're found out to have this ability to kind of like control the earth's motion and like you can cause earthquakes and you can like split the earth in half and you can like you're really dangerous, and so a lot of societies shun these people. The second thing that's important to know about this world is that it regularly undergoes apocalyptic events known as a 5th season, which is just a period of time where kind of life is called off because the world has somehow changed in a fundamental way that there's no like recovering from. And so people have bound together in these like commune society type things in order to just stay alive. So I thought this was very much a Sorcerer type book because there's a lot of different aspects to it, and there's a lot of just like raw power that is a core of this book. And that to me feels like what a Sorcerer is. It's a bunch of like it's people who are like outcasts because of their bloodline, who have tremendous magic and tremendous destructive capability, just kind of playing with magic. And so that's very much what this book's like world building is. And then you have utterly delightful characters in the center of it, figuring out what to do with that power. And that, to me, also felt like what a Sorcerer is actually going out and doing. For Warlock, again, I debated for a while because there are a bunch of books on my shelf that I thought could fit, but I eventually went with Nevernight by Jay Kristoff because Warlocks, as with the book Nevernight, is for edgy kids. The Warlock class is all about forming a divine connection with a patron who is up to no good and channeling dark powers in order to like try new funky things. Warlocks are so limited in what they can do, but they are so OP in those few things that they can do, and that reminded me so much of what Nevernight is about. So Nevernight follows Mia, who is a girl who goes to pledge herself to basically the goddess of death, but like not in one of those like, oh, they respect the boundary between life and death. No, like the goddess of like murder, pretty much. And so she is training to become a disciple of this goddess, which means training to murder people, essentially, and training to like perfect herself as an assassin. And so we follow Mia through her training adventures and into the like depths of blood and shadow and darkness that we go into. This book is told in a way that many people don't like and many people love. It's kind of like this very edgy, sarcastic tone that is very like hardline realistic about what life is supposed to be like and how dark and terrible and twisted people are. And that again felt like the core of this book is sort of the darkness within people and finding ways to like decide your own morality within that bind. And that's very much what the Warlock class is, because you're trying to find your own morality and your own purpose when you have this pact with a dark entity. So I thought that was a good connection to the book Nevernight. The last class that I'm going to be discussing is the Wizard class. And for this one, I again debated for a while, but ended up picking Four Dead Queens by Astrid Schulte. This book is a murder mystery that hasn't happened while we're trying to solve it. Basically, this book follows a young thief assassin type girl who comes across a device that shows her the deaths of the 4 queens of her society. And so she has to race to figure out, to like report what has happened and what she knows to the authorities, only to find out that the queens are still alive, at least some of them are, and she might have the information as to how to prevent their deaths. Without saying too much, just the way that this mystery plays out is one of those that is going to keep you guessing and like keep you on your toes trying to figure out how it all fits together. And there are so many different stories and perspectives that you get piecemeal throughout the story that when it all comes together at the end, it was really satisfying for me. And so that to me aligned with the class of wizard, because there's a lot of like options that you have as a wizard. There are a lot of things that you can pick up on to tailor the story towards your own, which is like how I felt this book did with bringing in this new society and letting us see into the lives of the 4 queens who rule over very different portions of society. And yeah, I really liked it for that reason. But then also, wizards are very much prized for their intelligence, and I felt like the way that this book was like tricky and reflexive and needed to be sorted out and was a big puzzle is very wizardy to me. So that is why I picked this book. Those are, I think, what, 12 books to go with the core D&D classes that we all know and love. And if you don't know and love them, go look them up, I guess. This is a combination of both young adult and adult fantasy books. If you have any interest in picking up a new book, why don't you match it to your favorite D&D character at this point in time? Let me know what kind of D&D adventures you have had recently, and also, if you have any books that go with D&D characters that you've made, definitely let me know, because I find this really like fun and satisfying to just think about what the vibes of a book is, and like if a book were a D&D character. Not if the book characters were D&D characters, but if the book itself was a D&D character, what would it be? Really fascinating question to me. So if you have any thoughts and ideas, let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear it. Take care, guys. I'll see you next time.